Guys, I have to admit, I didn't think that testing out our villainous death trap by disguising it as a therapeutic gaming panel would work, but well done.
Welcome to the kill floor.
Wait, just kidding.
What?
Wrong panel.
Sorry.
So I guess we should start with introductions. That's a good idea.
Yeah, are we pretty much everyone in the lines kind of filtered in?
We're ready to go. They didn't close the door yet, so I don't know if that means we start.
I'm sorry if it
We don't want anyone to miss. We don't want any opening statements.
It's got to be, it's exclusive, is what it is. It's very, absolutely. All right. So let's just start. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome everybody to Bringing Characters to Life. How y'all doing out there? All right, first of all, I want to say on behalf of the Bodhana group that we are honored. This is our first PAX ever, and the first PAX Unplugged ever, so we are very, 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 very excited to be here and to talk about therapeutic gaming. Yeah. Who is into therapeutic gaming? Yeah.
Sure. So this is Jack Berkenstock. Yeah. Jack's our executive director, one of our founders, and also one of the clinical minds behind the Bodhana group. My name is Jared Ebert. I am one of the founders as well as also one of the clinicians.
I'm James Kirk, that is my actual name. So usually I do go by Captain or Cap or whatever. I'm actually one of the volunteer GMs for the Bodhana group and help out with various different things that they need me to do. I'm one of the minions. We operate out of everywhere we can.
Yeah. You just call us, we'll show up. Literally 10 minutes notice, we'll get there.
We have a van, it's no big deal.
Especially if you have pie.
Yeah. I have shade though.
Here's some pie. Yes, the van has windows.
All right, so I guess...
It's okay, relax.
That'll become maybe funnier when we give like our curriculum vitae and like our work experience so you know why exactly we're therapists. Yeah. And that may cause you to wonder why we're still therapists.
Yeah.
How many of you actually work in the human services field or are therapists yourself? Just so we get a decent idea. Okay. For the rest of you that don't work in this field, have any of you assisted with other organizations that do this kind of work?
Right.
Okay, for the rest of you that haven't, that's why I'm here, because when they start getting therapy with their speech, and they start talking about things you're not sure about, I'll be here to be as glass-eyed as the rest of you.
Just get that reflection.
Yeah, so I guess for the tens in attendance and the absolutely nobody watching around the world.
To the dozens!
Ladies and gentlemen.
All right, we had at least one McFarlane fan out there. All right, thank you.
Let's get ready to get well!
So, as was said earlier, I'm Jack Berkenstock, Executive Director of the Bodhana Group. I'm a master's level therapist. I have been in the human services field for about 23 years. I have been doing direct work, the kind of mainstay of my experience. I've been working with people who have expressed sexually problematic behaviors towards others, commonly known as offenders. So I work on their rehabilitation as well as working with victims of sexual abuse, kind of both sides of the coin because they both need to be treated and helped along. So in addition to that, I've worked with children, adolescents, and adults with disability. So I've kind of stretched the gamut. And throughout that, I've worked with people with varying disabilities, various issues, challenges. So that's kind of my curriculum vitae. And as far as my GV, my gamer vitae, hey, it's just as important, folks. We'll talk about that. My GV is I've been playing role-playing games since I was about 12 years old. The first system was, of course, D&D with the rules I made up because I couldn't understand the book at 12. I still don't know math. And THACO is like an infection to me. So, THACO? See, I can't even pronounce it right. That's ridiculous. No, so I've been playing about 32 years or so role-playing games, and we'll kind of get into that, but the rest of the panel.
I feel like you shouldn't go first, because now I'm like, I did stuff too.
How do you think I'm going to feel?
I have a very similar experience to Jack. We met when we were working in a facility for adolescents who had committed sexual offenses, and we started using gaming then because we were bored on Saturdays and had to get through a 12-hour shift. Yeah. And then it started doing good things for people, and we went, whoa, maybe there's something here. So then we forgot about it for 5 years.
Like all good ideas, it's like, that was nice.
And then we talked to some people when we were starting this nonprofit, the Bodhana group, and people started talking about how much gaming had helped them. And we went, oh, hey, we did that once. We should go back there. And that's how all this started. So we'll be talking a lot about those sorts of things as well.
I did stuff too. So I mostly came to them as a player. I was going to the yearly convention that we run called Save Against Fear, which is our big fundraiser for the Bodhana. Yeah, there's some fans. Still in
All 4 of you who were there, thanks.
I came there first because I was involved in a 4-person team called Grown as Gamers, which was a podcast that we just did because a bunch of our friends sat and listened to the 4 of us talk on our porch about all kinds of nerd stuff, and they were like, wow, you guys should really do that on the air. Okay. So we went and helped them run games, and then I got involved with Bodhana in other ways, and now it's gotten to the point where I'm part of the
destruction of audio equipment.
Yes, really good at that. Harry Dresden. So I'm part of the.
We will find a way to get each person to clap throughout this presentation. So there's one person in the back that's like, hell yeah, don't MST3K, yeah.
So now I'm just part of the team, and they bring me along because I get other people's movie references, and I can make my own, and I'm generally a fairly entertaining individual.
He laughs at jokes.
So yeah, also because I have opinions.
Right, so one of the biggest things that we always kind of talk about in any kind of Bodhana speaking event or anything is we always want to kind of go over what we call minefields ahead. And this is kind of like our version of a trigger warning. From time to time, there might be some things that we talk about that might get a little rough, might drudge up as some people refer to it as an ab reaction or something that kind of makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel the willies. But one of the things about this is we always make sure to try to find as much as we can, and in the application of therapeutic role-playing, following the principles of trauma-informed care. But we recognize that sometimes character creation can bring on uncomfortable feelings, and to some degree, that might be part of the goal. You know, talking about the uncomfortable kind of gets it out there. You don't force it on a person, which is where trauma-informed care goes back to. It's not like, hey, Johnny, welcome to the group. You're the new person in here. Tell everybody about that incest that happened, right? Whoa. I mean, you're not going to get that person. By the way, 18 years of working with sexually problematic behaviors, I'm kind of a little more comfortable than most
Jack
might
has
be.
no shelter for that.
Yeah, it's part of the clinical thing. But for that information, the safe word is cucumber.
You can say it to yourself. We're not going to do anything. Just mumble it under your breath, and that'll make you feel better someday. It's the mantra.
We'll stop, we'll talk about it.
But with any therapeutic approach, and this is absolutely, we're talking about gaming, we always look at 2 aspects. There are the inherent benefits of playing role-playing games, and there's a lot of different things that are going to help you out with social skills and, except for Jack, math, and all kinds of other things like that. But then there are the applied benefits, and that's where someone who is a therapist can take the tools that are given in a role-playing setting and use those in a therapeutic application to reach therapeutic goals. And we're leaning more toward that latter for this conversation, but we'll also be talking about the former to somewhat as well. So our purpose here today is first, most of our presentations we have to start with a role-playing game and go through that whole conversation. I'm going to assume most of you know what role-playing games are.
Does anybody not know what a role-playing game is? Raise your hand. You're not going to be outed.
Steve? I'm going to out Steve.
We found the outlier. It's this guy right over here. Oh, 2 people. I'm starting to get outnumbered.
So we've all used character sheets, and it's something we probably don't even think about as the character sheet as, kind of what we have this avatar that we're going to use in the game throughout that game is going to influence all of our decisions moving forward. So we're not going to introduce the idea of a character sheet. We are going to reintroduce that. We're going to start at the very beginning and kind of build it back up from, when you have a character with a high strength or a high charisma, what does that really mean? And what does that say about you in the way that you interact with that character sheet and play that character moving forward? That's really what we're all about here today. So we'll discuss some of those core elements, then we're going to go into the therapeutic connections. So we'll look at the gaming elements as well as the therapeutic elements of it, looking at empathy. Theory of mind is a really, really important thing when it comes to gaming. And for those of you that aren't familiar with theory of mind, the quick thumbnail sketch is that theory of mind is what allows you to understand that other people have free will and plans and goals and dreams and things going on with them. That essentially, we're not all the only PC. Everybody else gets to be a PC as well. and this isn't our adventure. And especially in the autism community, theory of mind is one of those things that individuals who experience autism very often do not have a great grasp on. They can't see, I said something about that person being overweight and now they're frowning, and I don't see a connection between those two things, that they might actually have feelings. So that's something that we feel like we can help a lot with in this therapeutic gaming mindset. And then we also want to talk about the separation between the character and the player, and then our mantra throughout everything, it's on our little wristband things, is what would your character do? That WWYCD. Because we found ourselves in a lot of situations. I might be going into a situation where I'm nervous because I'm going to be speaking to a group of like 200 people that I don't know.
Like that'll ever happen.
Yeah, I know, it's bizarre, it's a stretch. But I can think about that character that I played that had that really high charisma, that was able to negotiate with the king and make sure that our friends were released from their captivity. And well, if I can do that in character, I can totally speak in front of a group of tons of people. And that's that bleed that occurs in gaming that we'll talk about more as we go on. Slide.
Next slide, please, DJ.
You want to take that?
Yes.
We totally
Do you want to take
planned
the
this.
easy stuff? Yes.
It's low-hanging fruit.
All right, so with role-playing games, we're all taking on different roles, and we're all, we assume when we're at the table, trying to work in some kind of cooperative manner to achieve a goal, which gives us a great platform to work with a variety of different issues, going from people that might be on the spectrum all the way down to people that just have social anxiety or just uncomfortable talking with other people, sitting them down, having them play a character, giving them a safe space or a sandbox to play in. That's why we use role-playing games mostly for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the sandbox thing is hugely important because in the idea of therapeutic gaming, I can make the world as open and expansive or as small and comfortable as I need to be. I essentially control all of that overwhelming kind of lots of sensory input and can distill it down to a one-on-one conversation, or make you be in the middle of a city with thousands of people walking around, and I control that environment completely, which is a therapeutic tool for those of you who are therapists or who have been in therapy settings. It's huge to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about whether you're going to have like a city level campaign or an epic level campaign, about like, maybe you have, I actually ran a Shadowrun campaign years ago that the whole adventure only took place in a 4-block radius. So, we really played up the nature of like, when you're going on a run and in the middle of that run, that mother's son gets gunned down by the Yakuza gang. I mean, you're actually connected to that character. It's not now just some kind of faceless, dead bard that goes on the pile, right? This is an actual living, breathing person. You remember how sad this woman was because she was so proud when he won that spelling bee, you know what I mean? So when we talk about that, and that's going to kind of bring us to the next slide about what is a character. There's many different definitions, and it's not story time, it's a nice panel, so we're going to read single thing on there, but the character is the heart of this process, because it's you, or as much as you want to invest into that game and into this therapeutic process. It's the interpretation of what we get out of it, what we put into it, okay? But we want to think, I think, about like not only what characters we are and what characters we play, but I think a real important question, and we want to kind of throw this to the group, is just if you're an RPGer, and if you've had a ton of RPG experience, take your mind and take a little trip through time. And think about maybe those characters you played when you first started to the characters you're playing now. And think of why you chose to play one version. Now granted, some of it's age, developmental, the fact that poo-poo and pee-pee jokes and fart jokes were funny when I was 13.
That's totally not funny anymore.
No, not at all. Not very true. So, I mean, the whole idea of character and what we play or who we play, or more importantly, how we play, and we're going to get to that in a moment.
So, as a show of hands, how many people ever played that game where you try to make a character out of yourself and then role-play yourself in a role-playing game? Like, that was something I feel like everyone did, like, in the high school or after at some point. And how many fistfights do you get in with other people over, no, my strength should be 12, yours should only be 11, because I can bench, like, 90 pounds, and you can only bench 80 pounds. And I'm
I
like,
kind of feel like a fist fight would solve that argument.
there are dexterity and constitution. Shut up.
Okay, let me get my tracking sheet for one more fist fight.
See, and now you're not only not as strong, you have less HP than me. Anyway, so the character's the foundation for all this, but absolutely, if you think back to all those characters you played, if your GM came to you now and said, all right, we're going to start a new campaign, pick any character you've ever played before, and you can play that character in this game. I think we all know what character that would be. The one that we just constantly think about and go, oh man, we're telling stories from 10 years ago about this guy. Instead of actually playing now, we talk about the games we played 15 years ago. But absolutely, we all have those favorite characters. But have you thought about why that's your favorite character? What about it? Not necessarily their deeds or what they did, but who they are, how they interacted, who their friends were, what it said about you. And we'll start to talk about that some more as we go.
Okay. So here, of course, in general, the sections of the character sheet, we're not going to kind of read through this, but it's just going to give you kind of a little bit of a picture of what sections we're going to highlight as we go through and talk here, because all of these have relevance. Okay, all of these sections of the character sheet, it's more than just, what I have to roll when I want to do that thing that I want to do. These, when actually utilized, and this is why the word intentionality was on the first page of the presentation, because we are talking, whether it's therapeutic in a clinical sense, therapeutic in I'm a mom trying to teach my son and daughter how to get along and not scratch each other's eyes out over who ate the rest of the Frosted Flakes,
Which is very important.
Which is no one wants scratched eyes.
No.
How are these sections important? How can they help us? How can we delve a little bit deeper? So we're going to start to pick apart some of these with a little bit of that therapeutic benefit as part of our goal here.
And these character sheets can range anything from the postcard-sized character sheet of like the Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters from West End.
From the West End, through like Traveler, where you can die in character creation and your character sheet's like a phone book. Like it all applies. All these sections are in there somewhere.
Yeah, we're not citing any one specific character sheet when we're talking about this
Absolutely.
stuff because they all have different things. If you're playing Fate, you don't get attributes, you just have the trait portion. But we did notice, and we had some discussion about this when we're talking about morality, which we're going to get into. Most of us just assume, because we've played D&D first or second, that alignment tells you how you're supposed to act. If you really think about it, that's the only game I can think of, or one of the only ones, that the word alignment actually appears. Most of the other games expect you to build your morality out of the traits and other things that you put on the sheet.
Unless you're playing Shadowrun, in which case
you don't get morality.
Yeah.
Nobody more wins in Shadowrun.
No one does wet work, but everyone does wet work. Yeah, so I mean, we all know attributes. They're kind of basic. Again, the introduction slides aren't really the meat of what we're talking about here, but everybody knows most attributes are broken up into physical, mental, or social. Okay?
And we need to also identify the fact that when you're using role-playing in a therapeutic sense, it's much easier to play a character with a higher or lower physical attribute than what you yourself are used to experiencing as a human being than it is for the emotional or mental attributes. It's really difficult for me to play a character smarter than I am, because that's just not how intelligence works. I can think about what it's like to be really strong. It's hard to think about what it's like to be really intelligent. But we'll talk about that as we go, because there's a big part of this that is, as you're selecting your attributes, what is that telling you about what this person that you're working with values? What does it tell you about what they think about those things? If I'm going to play a character who's really charismatic, what is that, how I play that charisma? What does that mean about me? What does that mean about how I view people who are very charismatic? That kind of thing.
And then usually following off of the attributes, we kind of talk about secondary characteristics. And these are usually they call traits, or, there's different games use different terms for them, but, we're talking about things like, we mentioned physical, whether or not your character has a tattoo or a scar, or whether or not, for personality, you have a certain voice or a certain accent, and why that character has that. A lot of these things are, as we're going to discover, they're not just character affectations, okay? It's not just what you're learning in drama club. These are ways that you are exploring identity. Let's take it back to when we played House. When we played, well, I don't even know if kids still play Cowboys and Indians, because I think that,
It's insensitive.
yeah, you would get locked up if you even play. Let's play indigenous persons and invading other people. It doesn't roll off the tongue, right? But I think that when we get beyond, how you're playing, what you're playing, some of the deeper choices of behaviors and attitudes, or even the infamous ads, disads, advantages, disadvantages. it's more than just extra points to buy cool powers.
It's also that, but it's more than
Right.
that too.
Well, so I mean, the big thing as far as that, just to kind of go on a little rant about this, is the whole GM enforcement idea. So, how many of you have played in a system that has like an actual direct advantage, disadvantage system? Or you played with like, okay, now keep those hands up. How many of those disadvantages, who in here took an addiction as a disadvantage?
Right.
All right. How many of your GMs actually use that? Keep your hand up.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, that's kind of what, oh, thanks for the breeze from the hands all going down. But let's think about that on a really, truly deep level. And I have kind of a personal story, and this wasn't even like in the therapy section. This was just a Cthulhu game I was running, for my home group. One of the characters chose addiction, and of course it was kind of like that'll never come up, that's cool. Oh, it came up. And it wasn't like now your character wants a drink because the struggle and the pull of chemical dependency is what, I didn't go to this long, like I'm not a PSA. But we talked about how over time, the character, she would play it as the character getting drunk. So the character would be making fudged rolls. And then, without even discussing it directly, the remainder of the party would go, yeah, we're gonna go blah, blah, blah. And it was like, hey, can I come along? No, why don't you stay home? And eventually, she was like, they're ignoring me, my character. They don't believe in my character. And then she was talking about her own personal reflection about people she knew in her life who were ostracized and further launched into their chemical dependence by the family backing out on them. And she had like this aha eureka moment based off of a character experience. There was no direct intentionality on the part of that injection into the character. She didn't set out, well, I'm going to play a character with alcohol dependency so I can learn more about the nature of addiction. It's like, first of all, who talks like that? but if you go further, we don't always intend, and actually to kind of plug this in, one of the reasons that we chose Bodhana as the names, it's a Sanskrit word that means leading to an awakening or an understanding. So our platform is, gaming is that silent teacher. It's that thing that through the experience and really investing in the experience of going through these character little melodramas, going through experiences, and just having your brain kind of reflect on them. You kind of have these little like, that was interesting. I didn't think about that. And that's kind of where a lot of this stuff with traits and ads and disads and stuff like this comes from. So
I mean, it's essentially that you can't play a character with an addiction without saying something about what you think about people who experience addictions. You have to some degree, put your head into that mindset. And that's true empathy. Like, how many of us sit down on a Sunday afternoon and go, I'm going to spend the next hour really thinking about opiate addiction and what it's like? Jason, just no. But it's not a headspace a lot of us put ourselves into. And it's similar to like what an author does when they're writing a character. They're trying to get into that person's head and think about what that's like. But to have that further sandbox of seeing how other people interact with me and in that, especially that addiction element and things like that, that all gets into a really deep space that otherwise we would never have a chance to experience. I mean, there's almost no other setting that I can think of outside of role-playing games where you have this many variables that you're going to interact with that you have to think about. And in that moment, the GM looks at you and goes, okay, so your friends just stormed the castle, what do you do? And that's going to be based on all those decisions you made about your character and what they're going to do in that situation. And then you start to view everyday real life that way and go, okay, so this is the situation that I'm in, now what am I going to do? And you're going to start to think and put yourself in those same positions again. So the things that we've got to kind of consider and look at is, why did the player decide to play a strong character instead of an exceptionally fast character or instead of an exceptionally charismatic character? When the player hands me their character sheet, and this is one of my favorite things in the whole world as a therapist, they're handing me a window into their head that I don't get in any other situation. Like, there's never another time where I can sit down with somebody and they're just going to write down all the things they think are important about people. That's just not something that happens. So they're going to give me this. So why did they choose that? When a character has very high intelligence, very high charisma, especially if somebody's playing a character that is very different than themselves. So when we're doing groups and we're talking with folks that experience autism, and very many situations don't really understand what it is to have that social skill. What do they think that looks like? It's kind of like when you were in high school trying to figure out what being cool was, and so you found somebody like, I want to be like that person. That person's totally cool.
I have no idea.
Some of us are still getting there, most of us we're all.
I want to be like Fonzie. I am not alone.
Dozens of us.
Hey,
Dozens.
rules.
I'm going to ask you for the rest of the panel not to encourage Jack.
We're gonna he's gonna get the buy a leather jacket. He's gonna show up with a pair of sunglasses. It's gonna be ugly, like a month. Thanks, guys.
I'm already daydreaming about it.
So when we're looking at these, when we're handed the character sheet, when we're working through character development with that person, we've got to use that as a window. We've got to use that into that. And then we're talking about ourselves going through this as well. As you're making your character and you're deciding to play a different attribute, different thing. Very simplest. Let's look at gender. If I'm going to play a character of, I'm a male, I'm going to play a female character, the way I play that character says something about how I view members of the opposite gender. And that's something I've got to think about as I'm going through that. And there's an intentionality there. When you put somebody in different shoes, it's a really, really great experience. But again, because I'm a GM in this situation, I'm kind of God, so I get a lot of ability and power there. Rule zero is my favorite bat in the world to hit people with. You have a rule book? Great, it's gone. But we talk about this idea of like scaffolding, where if a character's going or a person's going to attempt some sort of challenge or some sort of check, I'm allowed to set that difficulty kind of wherever I want. So if I need someone to feel really good about something, guess what? That 3 they rolled in the strength check totally blows the door off its hinges, and they go in there and scare the crap out of everybody. Because that's what I needed them to experience in that moment. And later on, I can bring the scaffold down a little bit and make it a little more difficult on them, and they got to work a little bit more for it. And that's how we can kind of change the difficulty slider on life in that game very easily, in a way that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things as a GM is watching people play a character that is completely different from who they normally are as a person. You get to watch that initial struggle. It's a chrysalis going into stages of change, because they start playing the character and they have no idea what they're doing. And you can tell because they either get really quiet at the table and they do this a lot. No, I take those away at my table. There is no internet. So watching them develop themselves and develop the ideas around this character that's not like themselves. I actually played a character in a game called The Strange.
All right. Money Cook rules.
The character that I was playing was a weaver, and he was a psychologist that was or a psychiatrist that was addicted to the medicine that he was giving other people, and it was what was connecting him to these other worlds. So he took it to be able to do the things that he could do, but he started inventing patients so that he could prescribe this medicine to them, and kept all of his records and was really fastidious about it. And this is a person that I would never be, but I had to think like an addicted person that was also kind of like Hannibal Lecter style of psychotic. And it was a very, very strange character for me to play, and it took a while for me to accept that different role at the table. You just have to be careful of being able to separate character from player.
Which is a big deal.
Which becomes a danger. You have to be able to, like in the Matrix, you can do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, you have to take that spiky thing out of the back of the head.
Yes, take nothing else away from this. Take the spiky thing out of the back.
Don't let the spiky thing stay in your head.
And speaking of Hannibal Lecter, we were going to talk about morality next.
Nice. I knew that.
I mean, again, we don't want to retread the same tire pattern that we've already kind of driven over here. But I mean, morality asks that question of not only what choices would you make, but why would you make those choices? It's always this whole idea. Jared kind of jokingly talked about murder hoboing earlier, and talking about Shadowrun. But when we talk about the whole idea of why we make choices and how we make choices, is there a quest your character would never take, and why? Would your character take that kill job if it knew it would create orphans? Well, if no, why not? Because that standpoint is very important as to how you then identify other choices, and that feeds into what values you have or what is important to you. And that can tell us a lot about how people are using their own level of like justification and integrating all of their experience into their different decisions. I mean, you can go and slaughter that orc village, that's perfectly great. But how many GMs actually take the heroes back through that village that now has a bunch of husbandless orc women and a bunch of starving, crying children, and all their homes are burned to the ground?
You went back to the orc village again?
It's like, exactly. I'm sorry.
Jack and I did a panel a couple years ago at MagFest, and we used the orc village as an example, and like the orc women crying because the men were being slaughtered by these heroes and everything, and it just, we always go back to the orc village for some reason. And I was wondering before we did it about an hour ago before this panel started, I was like, I wonder if the orc village is going to come up.
Or orc village, no stimulus package.
So, you know, so literally one system in the history of gaming has used this pattern, but it has struck such a chord for all of us as human beings that has become a meme all across, you know, everywhere. Like every TV series, every book series, you'll see one of these pop up. And you'll find yourself in life going, well, that was kind of a chaotic, evil kind of moment I had there. That was not okay. Like, so we start to think through those things. And this leads us into...
Welcome to Psychology 101. I'm Dr. Cottonmouth, your professor. No, I do not imbibe. It's just a clever name.
This is the pre-discussed part of this panel where I was told that I could take a nap.
So glassy-eyed stares. But no, so Kohlberg's moral stages, and this is just to kind of tie it back to therapy for a minute, are essentially ranging from that, you know, do it or I'll spank you kind of situation, to borrow from dogma, all the way through the universal ethical principle of you're doing something because it's the right thing to do. You know, it's that whole, like, you know, Deadpool thing of, you know, wake up a hero, brush your teeth a hero, you know, go to eat your breakfast a hero. But the Kohlberg idea is that, you know, you're going through these stages in life, hopefully eventually reaching that point of universal ethical principle. However, the brain can't really differentiate to some degree between what I'm doing in real life and what my character is doing in a game. Like, I'm not saying that it's a pure fantasy world, like it's going to bleed over, and because I played GTA, I'm going to go murder a bunch of people. That's also not how it works. But when you have a character, or you have a person experimenting with a different moral reasoning, or even experiencing with moral reasoning in general, and they're allowed to do that again in that sandbox, in which there are consequences for their actions, but they're not really huge consequences. Like, my character does something evil and gets the police after them. It's not quite the same as if I knock over a 7-Eleven and have the police actually after me. But it puts your brain in a similar space. And when your brain is in that space, you're considering all the possibilities. You're generating empathy. And so the idea is, if we experiment with a higher moral level and then come across a moral situation at a later date in real life, how much does having experimented with that allow us to think down the line of the consequences of what might happen, of how things might go? And this is where we can put, especially we're talking about kids, into a situation where they've got to experience through that. And it's a really, really important thing to be able to do.
Okay. That was a couple of those questions there, but I mean, you know, can we show the consequences and choices? You know, I talked about the, you know, oft-pillaged orc village, but it's you know, it's about this whole idea of choices do have consequences. And the cool thing about the narrative role-playing aspect, you know, using RPG is you have the ability to generate consequences that aren't really, like you said, true life consequences. I can play around a little bit. You know, if I'm talking about asking a girl out or a guy out, you know, and I'm a little bit nervous socially, I can kind of practice what the responses might look like. I can ask multiple people in the game, multiple female or male characters that I find attractive, and I can get different reactions from the GM every single time. So now, I might be developing case-based reasoning. I might be developing a battery of options like, oh, well, this person said this in real life, and I remember when we did this, and, you know, the GM was, you know, this is how they responded back to me when this happened. You know, so we're actually kind of skill building in a very strange way through the power of the narrative. Because it's okay to take a chance when it's just a die roll away from another option.
And it's also a therapeutic distance thing, where I can very easily structure it so if my character goes and tries to ask somebody to prom and gets turned down, Well, it was my character that did that. It's not me. So I don't feel that blow the same way I would if I actually got laughed at in the middle of high school after asking the girl out that I've been crushing on for 6 weeks. And totally no personal experience here. So, still hurts. Oh, man. Oh, I feel justified. This is amazing. If you guys can just continue to pity me, that's just going to make you feel sad.
We will split the session fee to the entire audience, so yeah, you're all gonna have 20 cents.
There was a really great situation that came up recently. This is actually in a movie, and I've used this a couple times as an example of like a moral quandary or a moral choice. So if you've seen Spider-Man: Homecoming, right? Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
one person seems.
Apparently, you guys need to get
What do you
together.
Those of you that have seen it, well, those of you that haven't, this is not spoiling anything. It happens in like the first 8 minutes of the movie. Right? It is the beginning of the movie. Think about the opening scene with Adrian Toomes and his construction people working on the aftermath of this huge superhero fight that broke out in New York that destroyed like the huge parts of the city. And he paid for these contracts and came in to come clean up. And then the government steps in and says, no, we got it from here. Now, morally, he decided to then, because the government was hiding things and they were taking everything away and he had a family to provide for, he decided to turn to a life of crime. Was there another way to do this? Was the government really within their right to step in and do this kind of thing and oust the little guy, like out of this work that they had? Would they have done a better job just because they were funded by these, big corporation people, Tony Stark? But who was in the right, and was it the right option? Probably not. He was a villain. He ended up in jail. But really think about the types of things that you would be pushed to if you were in that situation. And I think it's because it hit so close to home for at least myself, because my father was a pastor, so I've seen him several times get ousted from churches and have to go preach in another place, and we had to move several times, and I wasn't in agreement all the time of those decisions, but he never became a supervillain, so.
That's good. that we're aware of.
There's that.
That we're aware of. It allows that element of...
Sandy knew Spider-Man was going to be on the next podcast. My transitions are on point.
One of my favorite things...
folks, segues.
Not those.
No, not...
One of my favorite things about this, overall, is that you can teach really easily that life's not fair in these situations. That sometimes the villain kind of gets what they want, and there's not a single thing you can do about it. And there's an idea in training, especially in team building, called predetermined failure, where I'm going to give you a set of objects or a task that I know that you cannot complete in any way, and see how you handle as a team or as a person not being able to complete your objective.
Something kind of Kobayashi Maru-esque.
Really? All right, thanks, guys.
Pop culture reference.
Star Trek. Sorry. But that's a great teaching tool. To be able to have that complete control is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, talking about skills, powers, spells, equipment, they're kind of different vestiges of the same real kind of like Deus Ex Machina, like plot device kind of thing, the MacGuffin, if you will. You will? Well, I will so MacGuffin.
I will MacGuffin.
But I mean, on one hand, it gives definition to the character. It kind of makes that character unique. But when you talk about a sword, where did you get it? Why is it important? Is it the Inigo Montoya sword? That your father made? Is it? And does it try? Yeah. See, I'm what happens, folks, if you raise your child via television. So on one hand, they become a therapist. On the other hand, they got nothing without cable. But with this kind of looking deeper, how can we then, even if it's through, like we were talking about, powers and the whole joke about Uncle Ben, great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, fireballs are awesome.
That's not a joke. Uncle Ben died.
I feel shame.
I was just
But when we talk about the true impact of what that fireball's destruction was, learning to use power judiciously, we can really talk about how a person learns to manage in kind of a way, how to manage anger. Because that unleash of that destruction, that's an allegory for anger. And how, yeah, you can say whatever you want when you're mad, and you can just throw out as many expletives as you possibly know. Foreign languages, it's the first thing we learn in them is how to swear, right? So you can swear and say all the mean stuff that you feel at that moment. But how does that make another person? And can we think about that moment before we say those things that we really don't mean, but it's the anger talking, not us? We can use powers, spells, items that a person has as that allegory to help kind of drive that forward. And when we're talking about like where things come from and all that, we actually are kind of moving into one of the next areas, which is the history.
So I just real quick, I did want to say the whole intention behind like spells, powers, items, some of this stuff just naturally progresses as people are adventuring because they expect that they're going to get loot or some kind of a reward. Maybe you can give them something that, you know, is really super powerful, and it gives the player the option of hitting an easy button at some point. They have something that they could use that could just game break something, you know, could change the world. And it goes to that Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park line, just because you could doesn't mean you should. You know, and now you're asking the player to identify not only as themselves, but then as the character, like, is this something that I would really do? What if what I'm doing here fixes a plague that's affecting this city, but it doesn't make the plague go away, it spreads it to another area that I'm never gonna have to deal with. I've seen the horrors that this plague has wrought on this city. Am I willing to do that? You know, and that's the sort of thing that we talk about that you can do with these extra powerful things, or these spells, or these other pieces of equipment that you can give them. Sometimes it really does come down to usage and intention, which you can explore at length.
And so all this ties together again, we were talking about ethics, things like that. If you ever want to see somebody's true ethics, give them a bunch of power and see exactly how they interact from that point forward and what changes about them, and what changes about their character and how they approach situations. You know, if you're playing a superhero game and somebody has mind control, man, it's going to get really interesting really quick for that person. But it's also going to tell us as therapists or as GMs, or even about ourselves, kind of what kind of lurks in the dark corners of where we're at and where that person is and what's going on there. So it's definitely something to look at overall with items as well as powers, abilities, things like that.
I mean, in general, looking at history, I mean, we all know the history of the character, where they came from, you know, that, what is it, the infamous 30 questions that they ask in the old Faz's Shadowrun book, you know, and any RPG, I mean, now they're actually, and I love this, in current RPG, they're actually building all this stuff into the book for you, a lot more than they used to, which I think is great, because it's really throwing that importance onto that narrative history of the character. What you do and who you are is important, granted, because it's your raison d'etre, but why you got to that point and how you arrived at being that hero. That's why it's called the hero's journey, not just the hero's whatever. I can't think of a creative way to explore it out. But what's that?
The hero's destination.
The hero's destination. Hey, there you go. Why aren't you up here? But, you know, looking deeper, you know, how the history of us, you know, made us who we are. So, you know, how much of yourself you put into this character, it kind of goes back to a term that, you know, I learned through, called bleed. Who in here knows what bleed is? All right.
In a role-playing sense, not like...
Sorry.
What is this?
Yeah, but that whole idea of bleed of basically how much does my character inform me as a player, and how much does what I do as a player inform that character that I'm playing? You know, what's that crossover, or we might call it transference or counter-transference, you know, in the psych biz. What that level of immersion and how much you're willing to put yourself out there is really quite important when you think about history and even that choice that you make in the moment. In one of the sessions that we run therapeutically, we work with a local group called Olivia's House, which is a nationally recognized grief and loss center. And we actually ran kind of short burst groups about grief and loss. These are kids that had lost their primary parent. And so we were running them through this whole adventure arc about grief and loss and, you know, what it feels to lose, you know, a person that you really care about. So throughout this whole arc, one of the pieces was about these mythical snakes who were, you know, they were the shedding snakes. So it was all about what you need to let go of so you can grow bigger and grow, you know, more developed. So again, allegory. And we knew kind of going in that the one character was afraid of the dark. So our whole goal is to kind of like, okay, is he going to talk about this fear? So it's, what do you fear? All kinds of like weirdness there. And he was like, I don't fear anything. And we're sitting there like, man, we got, what? No, wait, you're lying. Like, your mom told us you're afraid of the dark. We did this. Yes. So eventually, when we kind of got to discussing with him, his character was Bert the Spy, and that's not his real name. Obviously, his name is Bert.
It's not his real name. It's something about character. Characters don't apply to him.
Hi, I'm Bert T. Spy.
There you go.
Right, Pro T Robot.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we've been here too long, Jack. Wrap it up. But when we were talking about, the character, we were kind of checking in with him, and he was kind of like, we knew he named his character after his father. So we were like, okay, that's kind of cool. But he pretty much like kind of schooled us in this process, and he was like, yeah, that wasn't just the name of my dad. He was like, I was playing my dad. Yeah, see, tear? But is a 10-year-old kid. We didn't front load that as part of the process. He did that of his own agency because he felt that's what his character needed to be. He wanted to explore the person he didn't know by playing in the way he thought he would have done. And that developed this phenomenal amount of closeness to him. And that, I think, is just kind of one of the immense attributes of playing to the power of this whole idea of the character and what that can bring to a person. So before we go ahead and take some time for questions here, we always want to be asking WWYCD, what would your character do? So...
Go ahead.
Me?
You're on a roll.
Just forget he's rolling. It's but no, we can challenge self-image to really talk about who we are and what we stand for and what we feel about ourselves. And sometimes we learn that we're wrong about something, and that's okay. That's part of growth. That's why we put rubber in the ends of pencils, because everyone makes mistakes, right? Thank you. I got that actually from the old Mighty Mouse Adventures cartoon. It was a backpack joke. For anyone in here, there's 7 people who watch that show. See, I don't make pop culture references. I make excessively over-obscure pop culture references. I was a lonely child. So, no, and we also engage empathy. The whole idea of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's a decent description, but let's think about how, truthfully, playing as someone else would play, even if it's a fictional character. We're able to tap into feelings that we may never get to explore otherwise.
When we talk about the expanding personality, gaming gives us options that we otherwise would never have. I get to beta test and play all kinds of things. I get to try out different stuff that I would never do. I'm here talking before a group of all kinds of people, and when I was in high school, if they screwed up my order at McDonald's, I was too shy to walk back and be like, I ordered a McChicken? I just couldn't do it. I was terrified, because somehow they were going to yell at me and it was my fault and something was going to go wrong. But through gaming, I'm like, I interacted with people all over the place. I've come to cons and gamed with people I've never met before and had conversations with them in character, and I'm able to do that. So I can do this. I can take on the best parts of that character and be that in my everyday life. And that's that bleed. It's a really important thing that allows me to, what if I wasn't shy? Let's pretend I'm not shy for 10 minutes and see what happens. And after I pretend that often enough, you kind of become not shy, almost in spite of yourself and by accident, because you've been pretending not to be for so long, one night a week, while soaking in Cheetos and Mountain Dew. Your creative thinking, very often when we get into panic situations, the brain reverts back to that fight or flight, right? We can only see 1 or 2 options out of it, and so we think, my options are my family stars or I become a Spider-Man supervillain. And gaming allows you to kind of look at all the different ways that I might actually go about this. What are the different things that are there? Because I've got other people around the table. And it gets to a point where, one of the running jokes is that I've got this round table in my head of all my gaming friends, and my boss is like, you have to be here by 11. And my friends in the head are going, one's going, you can be there at 11:45, it'll be fine. The other friend's going, no, definitely be there by 11. So they're all giving me advice in my head as we're sitting there on the gaming table.
Have you taken your medication today?
No, I don't. It's just minor schizophrenia. Overall.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Let me say, Had to throw that out there.
I've had a lot of success with identity with especially first timers or people that haven't played a lot of role-playing games. If you want to develop somebody's identity, I wish I could remember where I pulled this from. It's a list of like 20 questions that you go through on your character, and it has nothing to do with the game. You can put whatever skin you want on this, but they're things like, what are your parents' names? What did they do for a living? If you were to open your refrigerator right now, what would be in this character's refrigerator? Would it just be like condiments, or would it be, fully stocked? In the morning when you wake up, does your character need an alarm clock, or does he naturally wake up at the time that they're supposed to wake up? Just like all of these little nonsense questions or these things that are going to have nothing to do with the actual game, except they do, because then you can take these things and you've already created this character that now lives and breathes, and you can put a skin on that stuff now. And instead of his parents being lawyers and doctors or whatever, they worked with the king, they were advisors, it was something else. And you can apply these to any character that you're trying to build in the game. And I think it's really worthwhile because it helps build that identity portion that sometimes people have no idea where to start.
Sorry, I just started developing a psychological assessment based on what's in your refrigerator.
I have a wife that's fully stocked.
All I have is ramen noodles and brown mustard. I don't know why I refrigerate when I'm on end, but
that's ridiculous. What kind of psychopath refrigerates their ramen?
We have about 10 minutes before they're going to come in here and forcibly remove us, so we really want to hear as many questions as we can possibly get to in that time.
Any questions? Just one more thing. Okay, I'll actually kind of have to borrow from all of our friends here who were in the panel yesterday, from Game to Grow, as well as Dr. B, all of our wonderful friends from the Megan, right? Okay, it's new people trying to remember here. But if we have the mic, if we want to go around to that, or if we want folks to line up,
we want to Donahue this, or like have people line up.
Donahue.
Well, that's an interesting question.
How many people in here know who Phil Donahue is?
Okay,
Actually,
5% of the room.
Somebody clapped and somebody wooed. It makes me smile.
All right, so if you have questions, raise your hand. We'll have a mic come over to you. I guess is what we'll try to do.
Yeah, that's what we'll try to do.
We have no preference. We don't know any of these people, so go to whoever.
Yeah, you first, sir. The most okayest GM. That wasn't my judgment. It's on his shirt.
It was a gift from a player.
Nice.
I actually came here because I'm, like myself, I'm a person in long-term recovery for alcohol dependency and a Spider-Man villain. And,
lock the door.
Game design has always been a passion of mine. Like, everything in my life I put through the game design filter. I look at the world through dice variables and charts. I've been thinking a lot lately, just my own experiences about sort of gamifying the whole addiction recovery thing to some degree, and maybe not so much as a therapeutic thing for people going through recovery, but more to maybe give people who aren't going through recovery, who have friends or family, to sort of give them some basis of maybe what that's like. Like, if you guys have any experience with that.
Well, actually, to give you a very good suggestion, you could probably leave here, go over and talk to some of the folks at Bully Pulpit, because actually the Fiasco engine is a phenomenal way to get a lot of kind of empathy building. There's actually, in one of our empathy programs that we use, like board games with role-playing, to develop certain skills. We actually, one of them that we use is a scenario set that takes you into the role of being a Russian orphan who was going through Russian. It was actually written by people who were survivors of Russian orphanages, and basically what they did was they made all of the character, affectations part of their experience. They made some of the things that were important in the relationship between the characters. So, if you think about Fiasco, for those who don't know, it's a very narrative-driven game, which basically is kind of it's Snafu, the role-playing game, At the midway point, all of a sudden, everything goes all, kinds of 6s and 7s. So it's a way to play out, and I hesitate to use this word not as a judgment thing, but it's a way to play out dysfunction in a way that is narrative driven, so people are put into playing directly the role of a person impacted, and that might be the genesis event, so to speak, that kind of starts that whole playability. I mean, again, if you're looking for, just as an advice standpoint, if you're looking for a game that's going to capture the experience of something, it builds a lot of narrative into it, because the narrative is where you're really going to get the punch for that. Now, to some degree, mechanics might work for it, and honestly, if you would like, we would be more than willing to help out with any kind of design or just give you pointers or whatnot. But that would be my advice, is include something with a lot of narrative, because the way people talk out that kind of feeling is where you're really going to get kind of the heart of getting that issue to a point of awareness.
It also has to be fun.
Oh my gosh,
the reason we got into this in the first place is there are a lot of therapeutic games out there, and they're terrible because they're games designed by therapists who are trying to make a game that is going to be those that have played the game, right? The
game.
Therapists don't want to play that
The
game. So we want to take games designed by game designers, because they're going to be fun games, and then find ways to therapize them. Therapize. We're sticking with it. It's just going to be that.
Yep.
All right. Who else we got? We got just a couple minutes here.
Your hand, like, way shot up right over here. You're very excited about something.
I am very excited.
Good, me too.
When I was in college studying psychology, I actually did my final thesis on role-playing and how it defines our sex and gender identities.
Wow.
So I was wondering if you had specific thoughts. I know we've addressed like how it can help with anxiety or certain mood disorders, addictions, but what do you think the influence of RPGs are on our sexual and gender identities?
So that's not an area we've done a whole lot with, but I can see a lot of application. I can see a lot of empathy building. If you put someone in a situation where they're going to role play a transgendered character, that's going to say a lot about what they think about folks who are transgender. It's going to say a lot about what they perceive about it, and also the way others react to that person. It's going to give us a lot of practice, give us a lot of time to be able to chew through that material in a way that makes sense. But it's definitely an area that, it hasn't been explored a lot that I've seen in a lot of games. But I know one of the techniques that therapists have used working with what used to be referred to as gender dysmorphic disorder, but we're no longer using those terminologies. But they would say, take a vacation with this adolescent who is feeling that they may have a gender assignment issue. And go and be the opposite gender, or the gender that they're identifying as, for a weekend. Take a vacation, get away from everything, get called by a different name, wear different clothes, have everybody around you, introduce yourself to everybody through that gender, and then kind of see how the other problems fall away for a while, because there's not all that stress of being something or someone you're not. I can see a role-playing game being a really great way to do that on a small scale. So I think there's a lot of benefit and possibility.
I was thinking an important thing that we haven't mentioned at all, but I think something that a lot of groups, virtually every group, should do, especially if we're talking about things like this, and where maybe somebody is a male and they're playing a female character, things like that. I think as a group, you need to sit down and you need to talk about your limits.
Yeah.
Which is going to invite discussions on these things. What is off limits? What, I need to know as a GM, what elements of a story can't I tell? Even if it's something innocuous, like rats, like I'm afraid of rats. Okay, well, I'm not going to include rats into this because you clearly get very afraid of rats, right? So being able to discuss those things with your group ahead of time is actually probably going to invite some of those discussions that you can get everybody's point of view on it. And it's also, I think, going to make them a little more careful when they're playing the character about representing that gender role within the group, or representing that character in the world proper. Because you guys have had those discussions up to this point. I think you can probably get a lot out of it by defining not only roles but limits in the beginning of the game before you start.
One of the games that we've used is No Thank You Evil from Monty Cook, and it's a fantastic game. It's what we use for the grief and loss groups that we did. But it's got this element within it that is the character, the person can essentially say, no thank you evil. Like they touch a token, and we stop and rewind and go, okay, what was uncomfortable about that? That was a therapeutic hot button. That was something that was an issue there. Let's discuss through. Or we can say, we're just not having what just happened, and we're going to move past it. So having that sort of house rule in play, whatever that can be, now in a therapeutic setting, I'm expecting to talk through and work through that material. You don't get the get out of jail free card because you're uncomfortable in therapy. That's generally what we're here for. But if we're hanging out with friends, I'm not gonna be like, okay, so tell me why you thought that domestic violence was a problem. Like that's, don't mix therapy and friends. It's just not a good idea in a lot of situations.
We can probably take time for one. Welcome. We can probably take time for one more. I want to get somebody from this side. You about halfway back there, the young lady with the glasses right behind the person that's pointing at their head. You.
Raise your hand. You. I might. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher.
Oh, perfect.
Group because I'm sitting here and listening to this and I'm taking notes directly apart from my principal. I'm wondering, can you speak very briefly just about how you manage this kind of in a group session? Because I'm writing for some areas and I'm like, oh, but how am I going to manage that girl and that guy? And what happens if he clubs girls and she gets injured? And oh my goodness. And so how can you talk? And you share some great stories about things from a one-on-one perspective. But what would be your sort of major takeaways for folks trying to do this?
Yeah.
We all want to
Do you want
answer.
to talk? Do you want to talk?
This is great.
So real quick, a couple things that I would do. One, as the GM, make all of your roles behind a screen. If you want to control the way that things are going during the narrative, like you can roll behind a screen, and then if you need to have that, oh, it failed moment, or if you want to make something a little more dramatically tense, you can always kind of flub it like that. Now, if you're talking about them flubbing in front of you, there's not really much that you can do about that, except that you could take the description of the action that's being done. Don't just count it as a success versus failure. Give it a little bit of story flavor. So kind of describe the narrative. Maybe somebody slipped while they were going in for a swing, and they're currently prone on the ground, but maybe it gives them an advantage that they haven't seen yet. Give them a second to play with it. You could also, there are systems out there that are actually diceless systems that just use the character's intention during the game to make those decisions and to afford those results. And that gives you much more narrative play in between those things without having a definitive dice roll that dictates part of the action.
And one of the systems that I'm a big fan of, especially in therapy, which is the Apocalypse World engine. Especially Masks is one that came out relatively recently. I'm a huge fan of. But that essentially just is a narrative control game where if the player rolls and does poorly, I as the GM get to narrate what happens next. If they roll and they succeed kind of, they get to narrate a piece and I get to narrate a piece. And if they succeed completely, they get complete narrative control. Whatever they say happens is what happens, we move forward. So there's never a, that failed. It's a, well, I'm gonna tell you how that worked out. And that's just kind of how that rolls through. So it doesn't become that hard brick wall of failure, which can be an issue. And all the stories that we shared and the things we're talking about, we've never done we don't do a one-on-one role playing. It's all within a group. So it's, Bert the Spy kind of situation. That was a kid in a group as that role and how that works out. So.
Yeah, because a big part about this is social learning theory. It's also kind of the interaction between the players because, again, kind of it was spoken as a person who's been in that kind of scenario therapeutically, running groups for like 18 years. It's more about if I call you out on it, then I'm the authority figure calling you out. If a peer calls you out on it, it has a lot more impact because of that.
And if one of the characters in the game that I am playing as the GM calls you out on it, it's not me. Don't get mad at me. It was the king that was unhappy with what you said there.
Yeah.
So
now, don't beat that kid up, though.
I get some
called you out.
Yeah.
Final thing about that, when you have somebody that fails at the table, it opens up an opportunity for somebody else to step in and be the assist or also be the hero. So don't ever be afraid to share that spotlight between the characters because it gives everybody an opportunity then to succeed at some point.
Now I will say that we ran over in time. I'm getting the cut. We're cutting you, and I don't want to be cut. It's not the kind of bleed I want to do. But no, I will say we will be waiting outside if you do have any questions to ask us individually.
Yes,
if you want to find out more information, we will also be handing out some of our postcards that has a QR code in the back that will take you right to our website. Also, if you need more kind of direct info on maybe how to get the service in your area, all of this will take you to our websites and all the various emails. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Pat.